Yes, you are anti-human.
What?
Don't make that face. Somehow, along your journey of being alive, you found a way to alienate yourself from humanity.
What was that?
You also may be experiencing some animated internal conflict side effects. Hi, you may not know me, but my name is Fabilla, and welcome to Things I Thought Of, a show where I talk about things I thought of.
And my name is Anti-Human, also known as AH or
Humanity is practically unavoidable. I mean, we're social creatures. Even if you find yourself in social isolation, there still seems to be some kind of desire to interact with others. The void is not a fun place to be. Trust me, I've tried. I don't like this! But even as social creatures, many of us still have this innate desire to hate on other human experiences, actions, likes, dislikes, cultures.
But what if that person deserves it?
Well, Harold, I was mostly talking about situations where the other individual isn't hurting anybody. What even leads us to hurting people in the first place, and why do we disconnect ourselves from the rest of humanity? Well...
Hey, I just came back inside from covering my car with a blanket because it's hailing outside. This seems like a good opportunity to talk about what this video is not about.
never having an opinion on something, not having emotional reactions, not being open to criticism, why you should like everything and everyone till the end of time, being completely free from judgment, excusing the actions of those who hurt others.
That's not what this intense battle is about. No. I'm here, well, you're here, well, I mean, we're here, all of us are here, to hopefully fight off becoming anti-human. One of the things I am the heaviest proponent of is I really hate bugs. This is like low-key my worst nightmare, but this area is really pretty. One of the things I'm the heaviest proponent of is everyone's ability to change. So, as we go through this video, I challenge you to listen because, one, I might not really be talking to you, but if it sounds like I am, could you just listen to me anyway? Oh my gosh, I spent a whole minute talking, but I never really said what I was thinking about. Let me just press play here.
What's up?
Ugh, everyone has a podcast. Why are you all so against everyone? Do you know how anti-human being you've been raised to be? You've been conditioned to believe that things are only valuable if very few people do them. That's weird. That's elitism, babes. Listen, I think we are so fundamentally antisocial. Because why? We only celebrate human beings for doing things that most human beings can't do. Now, that's weird, motherfucker, because in a collectivist society, you celebrate what people are contributing and you celebrate what the collective is able to achieve. In an individualist society, you need the mythology of the individual. And so the individual, to become an individual, has to be differentiated from everyone else. So you become so obsessed with finding people who don't remind you of other people. And in so doing, what do? You are alienated from humanity, from a genuine love in the human, from a genuine love in everyday people and everyday things and everyday phenomena that are not about something that no one can access or get into or achieve, okay? What's wrong with everyone? Ask yourself that.
Wow, I need a minute to think about this.
That's a good start, but I think I could use some help. Hey, do you think you have time for a Zoom call?
When I say the term or the phrase anti-human, what do you think that means?
Frankly, I'm not sure at all.
Someone, to me, like when I'm understanding the idea of being anti-human, is someone who is kind of like disconnected from the idea of like humanity or like the community that comes from humanity. When it comes to the idea of being anti-human in like a more like relatable, like individual sense, the main idea that like I first started off with was the idea of how like individualism has changed the way we feel about, seeing like the mundane or things that aren't unique. For example, if I hear that you, for example, are starting a podcast, right? And
Mm.
I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like everybody has a podcast. I'm tired of hearing people have podcasts. That thought is like almost an anti-human thought, because why does something only have value to me if no one else is doing it?
Mm.
So there are a few things that contribute to Anti-Human's power and why he's so deeply ingrained in how we think. Let's start with... Hi, how are ya? Are you enjoying the video? Cool! Then consider supporting my channel on Patreon. For as low as $1 a month, you get access to an exclusive Discord and bonus videos for every piece of content that I post. And if you're feeling a little bit more generous, you'll be featured in a video in doodle form like these stinky people. Good stinky, I promise. For this week's bonus video, I'm going to talk about when I left the country and nearly got kidnapped. If that sounds even remotely interesting, consider donating $1 a month. It goes a long way. Also, you should watch to the end of the video. There's some fun stuff that way. And if you enjoy this kind of content, binge the Things I Thought of playlist down below. There's more stuff like this. But most importantly, I appreciate you for watching. Thanks. Individualism, the concept that drives everyone to embrace their inner selves and try to be unique. It's the reason why I'm always 3 seconds away from shaving my head. See, individualism is about the idea that a person is a self-sufficient entity. As an individual, you have an obligation to know your opinions outside the general population, have autonomy, stuff like that. This is the cornerstone of one of two types of cultures: individualistic culture and collectivist culture. These two types of cultures are a way to classify various societies across the world. Obviously, individualistic cultures being rooted in individualism, and collectivist cultures being rooted in collectivism. Collectivism is the tendency to view yourself as interdependent within a community of people, instead of just being a little guy. What is viewed as important in these different cultures or countries can be wildly different. Here are some examples of differences that you can observe.
Depending on others versus self-sufficiency, emphasis on introversion versus emphasis on extroversion, education being about learning how to do versus education being learning how to learn.
I'm sure a lot of you are starting to think the individualistic side sounds pretty familiar.
This guy looks like me.
That's because the United States is like the pinnacle of individualistic culture, and most of my audience is there. But clearly it's not the only one, because, I mean, why would we have a definition for it in the first place? But also because the West is mostly characterized by individualistic culture. What's the West, you might ask? While most of these countries are in North America or Europe, there are a few things that could qualify a country as being a part of the West. But even if a country doesn't qualify as being part of the West, it can still be subject to Westernization, which is the cultural export of Western culture or ideals to other countries, whether it's by cultural diffusion or by force. The most common diffuser of Western culture these days has to be the United States, and one of her flagship ideals is the idea of rugged individualism. Originating in the frontier when East people started moving west, there was a lack of heavy population or infrastructure that was familiar. Those who migrated to frontier land Okay, sorry, I really hate bugs. Those who migrated to frontierland reap the benefits of high social and economic returns. Because of isolation from large groups of people and some kind of tough conditions, all they cared about was themselves. This is what came to be known as rugged individualism. But fast forward an amount of time I don't feel like doing the math on. The term was used by President Herbert Hoover to fight some of the collectivist ideas in FDR's New Deal, and now I'm talking about 1930s politics. Let me get this straight. I don't have a problem with the whole idea of individualism. Understanding the self is awesome, and autonomy is great, but some parts of it are really gross.
Which is one of the main pillars of this whole video.
Yeah.
People lacking the ability to connect with the fact that these are the people that you're talking to, or the people that you're talking about. The ideas that you're sharing are all coming from, or are all about, or are all about you interacting with people who are also human beings.
I think the general gist that I try to get at, and that I think the video we did on Buddhism helps get at when we talked about non-duality, is that it's like a hyper-individualism that we're speaking of, right? A hyper-individualism that turns into a dehumanization process, right? taking yourself away from your own humanity, taking like disconnecting other people from their humanity, etc. Because the entire focus is on the individual. You fetishize the individual, you fetishize the power that the individual has, and particularly, you know, that manifests in like just continuously judging people for their decisions as individuals and continuously feeling like you have to make yourself the strongest individual, etc. And these are kinds of some of the things we talk about with that. But there's a hyper collectivism too, and I think, you know, you mentioned like sort of like Eastern cultures and stuff. Like obviously they're all very varied and different, but a lot of what has happened and what happens historically in very sort of collectivist, like places that are seen as collectivist, is that there's a hyper collectivism. You have people that are these hyper individualist, libertarian American capitalists that are also hyper collectivists about like American exceptionalism and how great America and America is the only free state where there's freedom and freedom. These things are not super separated, and I don't think that the true answer is to be like we got to be more collectivist, but rather to recognize that these things are inseparable, right? The collective and the individual are one, and therefore the focus has to be on the humanization. Doing those things is part of my doing those things for other people, and I have to do things for other people as well as part of nourishing my own individuality, and I have to nourish my own individuality as part of nourishing my collective.
Every time I think about this concept, I'm reminded of that one part of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules, where Greg is tired of Rowley copying everything that he does, so he decides to tie a bandana on his leg and then roll up one of his pant legs.
Then Rowley's parents gave him their present, and guess what? It was a diary. It kind of ticked me off because I knew Rowley asked his parents for a diary so he could be just like me. After Rowley opened his present, he said, "We can call ourselves the Dairy Twins." I let him know exactly what I thought of the idea by slugging him in the arm, and I really don't care that it was his birthday either. One thing I will say though, I used to be mad at Mom for getting me a journal that looked too girly, but after seeing Riley's diary, I'm not so mad anymore. Lately, Riley has been totally riding me. He reads the same comic books I read, drinks the same kind of soda I drink, you name it. Mom says I should be flattered, but to be honest with you, it's totally creeping me out. A couple of days ago, I did an experiment to see just how far Riley would go. I rolled up one of my pants what the hell? Okay. I rolled up one of my pant legs and tied a bandana around my ankle and went to school that way. Sure enough, the next day, Riley came to school wearing the exact same thing. And that's how I ended up in Vice Principal Roy's office for the second time in a week.
That's right, Gregory. You don't need to be unique to be cool, Gregory. You can just let your friends do whatever they want, Gregory. I don't own the book anymore. I also need to return this. This isn't mine. I'm getting a little judgmental for someone who has a literal battle going on in his head. There seems to be a lot going on right now. Hey! Whoa. Let's see what else there is.
You made the point about how like conservatives will often be like, humanity like needs to be controlled, or whatever, and how lefties kind of have like their own flavor of that. You were talking about how like we'll see things and then we'll like pathologize them and be like, oh, this is like them reacting this specific way, right? And there's like a lack of, I feel like, connection to like how human a lot of these like reactions to things can be. Like thinking back to when, you know, all these protests and stuff were happening in 2020, a lot of people on a lot of sides were like, hey, like we shouldn't be burning buildings down. Even like most leftists would see like that kind of thing and be like, are you listening to what they're saying though? But regardless, it's like this is like these people like screaming out because they have something to say, and you're not listening to what they have to say. You're just like seeing the things that they're doing. And the energy of like looking at like someone's reaction to something and not really seeing them, but just like seeing what they're doing, I think is also a reflection of this other piece of being anti-human, which I think is like a level of elitism. Because when you see like, oh, these people are doing this thing, right? But I can recognize that, and I can see that these people are doing this thing. And because I can see and recognize that, or look down on like people's reaction to something, or be able to look down on like what other people's actions are. Because I can do that, I feel like that allows me to elevate some other level of elitism. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so, yeah.
I think thinking with that kind of mindset a lot of times detaches you from like the fact that this is like a fellow person, but it like kind of connects to people feeling like they're infallible.
Right.
Where it's like, oh, have you like not made a mistake before, or have you not like has that never happened to you before?
Right.
Fighting that like infallibility, like that feeling of infallibility, will like help people to see like more what people are saying, like
Yeah.
help you see what people are saying a little bit better. Because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, like the way that you're trying to communicate this idea might be like a little fried, but like I can see like where you're coming from when you do this.
So, what is it about conservatism that I believe makes you anti-human? Well,
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Harry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for years, and he's at.
So, my left shoulder right now is popped out of the socket.
wait. Just listen. Man, I'm suffering out here. There's a lot of things I can think of, but editing Babilla, I'm not talking about big C conservative. I'm talking about little bitty small c conservative or conservatism. Small c conservative is an adjective to describe a resistance to change. In the sense of culture or human-to-human interaction, someone who's small c conservative prefers traditional practices. The thing is, a lot of us have a little bit of conservatism in us. There are certain ways that we've been conditioned to live our lives that we want to stay that way. Maintenance of Maintenance of 3 square meals a day, monogamy, and some other third thing are all examples of that. Not necessarily that these are the correct ways to live your life. These are just the traditional ways of living life through what our specific frame of reference is. But, okay, yes, but how does this specifically become anti-human? Well, small c conservatism doesn't have to hurt anybody. There are ways for you to live a traditional lifestyle that don't negatively affect the lives of the people around you. You being monogamous isn't going to directly prevent someone else from being polyamorous. Unless 2 things happen. I'm not specifically talking about monogamy and polyamory right now. The general stuff now. Oh, man. I'm suffering. No, conservatism starts becoming anti-human when you A, start judging the lifestyles of the people around you, or 2, start taking action to prevent people from living an unharmful lifestyle. Now, you may have a different definition of what you define as harmful, but if they aren't harming anyone else, it's not harmful. Babilla Warema, Michael Scott. So whatever conservative ideals that you have, as long as they're not harming someone or causing you to judge another person's lifestyle, then it's fine. As long as it's not hurting anyone else or you. I very distinctly remember a time I attended a small outdoor concert. It was on a local college campus, and the group that was performing was doing a variety of different songs, but at a certain point they decided to do something a little harder. If I remember correctly, it was either Guns N' Roses or Metallica. And the minute they pulled this song out of the shadows emerges this crowd of like colored hair, queer-coded characters. And I witnessed one of, I think, the most beautiful moments of my entire life. I watched them dance. In that moment, I thought a lot of things. Chief amongst those was the fact that I needed to poop. But lieutenant to that, I was seeing this group of people likely rejected by greater society have fun. It was this core memory that made me feel more connected to humanity. It's rejection of the different, the unconventional, the probable hatred of gonzo that keeps you disconnected. That keeps you in the mindset of essentially hating on people that are just trying to live their lives. Just like you. Disconnection. It's time for me to explain.
It is something that I see in myself, and it's part of why it can be an annoyance for me, especially because I can kind of recognize it, like my own tendency in other people, and sometimes I don't want to see that, which I also think it may be a key part of what the anti-human tendency is, actually. Like, we, instead of acknowledging our own faults and then seeing them in other people, or our own like spectrums of emotion and thought, and seeing them in other people, when we see them, we often run away. We feel very scared by this. We feel very frustrated by this. And that causes us to personify that feeling with actually somebody else that's the subjective bad on the outside that we can stand on the outside of and judge, which I think is the counterintuitive behavior. Is you're supposed to recognize when like that sometimes you lose your temper. And so when you see somebody else lose their temper, your reaction can be like, oh, I know what that feels like. And now I know how, like what helps me when I go through that so I can help this person. Or I know what type of danger can come from that, etc., especially on the internet, because the internet is set up elaborately to never have a mirror, right? There is no way you see yourself while you're on Twitter or you see yourself while you're on Reddit. You barely have any function to do that. And especially when you're under the code of anonymity, all you need to really do on there is just say whatever comes to mind and react to all these things that are in front of you. And so it can be this very convenient place for people to jump on and see all these things that make them uncomfortable, that make them stressed, sometimes even knowing that they should be confronting them, but finding elaborate ways to not quite confront them, not quite confront the human experience in ourselves that we see in other people.
The idea of being disconnected is the thing that makes anti-human so powerful and scary. And cowardly. Being anti-human is cowardly because disconnecting ourselves from other humans is easy, especially if that person has done something that you view as detestable, annoying, or unacceptable, etc., etc. Let me make this a little bit easier. If you're a man, have you ever wondered why women don't like being called females? Sometime in 2020, one of my favorite artists, Maya MXM posted this on Twitter, and it had me a little bit confused.
Stop calling women females. It's degrading. Thanks.
At first, when I read this, I was like, I don't really understand the problem here. Like, isn't female just another way to refer to a woman? What's the big deal? I kind of shrugged it off at the time, but now I have a little bit of a better understanding of why it could be bothersome. I understand what makes it anti-human. I'm sure you understand why because of where we're at in the video. This is an example of disconnection. See, when Maya said that the term can be degrading, she's referring to the use of female in common conversation, not specifically in reference to biology. We'll get to that. It's also a little bit weird because female is in reference to biological sex, and not all women are females, not all females are women. So, understandably, drawing connection between this terminology and negative sentiments makes a ton of sense, especially when you get down to the roots of it. Just like men, women are human beings, and this othering, this disconnection, kind of pushes us away from that idea.
Hey, I don't think I explained this very well, and I also wasn't really a fan of the tone that I was using, to be honest.
Who is that for?
Listen, the point that Maya is trying to make and the subsequent points that I tried to make are related, different, and both important. What Maya was trying to say in that now deleted tweet is that a lot of times when people would call women females, it would be closely followed by othering talking points, like ones made by pickup artists or like red-pilled people. Females do this, females do that, etc., etc. Not to say that it's also not also used in a similar way in people's common conversations. But when it comes to common conversations, though, the point that I'm trying to make is to use inclusive language because inclusive language is cool. Women in common conversation. But I also intended to use it as a transition into the way that men disconnect themselves from women, which overall has like negative outcomes. Though there can be acknowledgeable differences, the point should be to get a better understanding of who you are othering yourself from, not to distance yourself from them, which is what I'm going to talk about now. I was watching a video the other day on Elliot's recommendation by the creator Wendigoon. Despite me being a generally scared individual, wait your turn, man, I promise I'll get to you. I'm actually a huge fan of his channel and the discussion of generally creepy things, to an extent. See, in this video, Mr. Goon, which I'm sure he'd probably have me call him Wendy, Mr. Goon was his father's name, discusses No Longer Human, a novel by Osamu Dazai, adapted by manga artist Junji Ito, who's generally known for his contributions to the horror genre. The novel follows the life story of a boy named Yozo and his unorthodox view of humanity. From an early age, Yozo had never really been able to understand other humans, their emotions, and their wants. In a lot of cases, when faced with the true vulnerability of humans, it scared him. When he was young, Yozo also experienced what it looked like when humans got their way. He was abused by a lot of the people who worked in his childhood home. So instead of engaging with these scary emotions, Yozo took a detached approach to life, often hiding behind behavior he called clowning. It was also said that Yozo was a bit of a magnet for women, and slowly, he started forming sort of a warped perception of them. It's said early on in the novel that Yozo doesn't believe women to be the same species as men. He thinks of them as totally different beings, or creatures, as he says.
These and various other generalizations were products of an observation of women since boyhood days, but my conclusion was that though women appear to belong to the same species as man, they are actually quite different creatures. And these incomprehensible, insidious beings have, fantastic as it seems, always looked after me. Insidious beings, okay.
There's a long list of things that Yozo witnesses, is a part of, or is responsible for. Being responsible for the death of his best friend at a young age, assisting with what was supposed to be a tandem attempt where he ended up surviving, witnessing the assault of his wife at the time and not actually doing anything about it. All examples of doing something shitty! Yozo's fear of the reality of what a human really is and his subsequent disconnection from them is what allows a lot of this stuff to happen. And for the people who are like, but Bill is giving another example from fiction. There's no way that this could possibly be real. This is an example of hyperbole. I say to you,
These are yours, right?
Ito's adaptation of the book adds not only illustrations, but plot points that weren't in the original novel. At the end of the novel, a woman at the bar that Yozo frequented says this.
The Yozo we knew was so easygoing and amusing, and if only he hadn't drunk. No, even though he did drink, he was a good boy. An angel. Yeah, you're right. This did go places, huh?
There are a few reasons why this line holds so much weight. The woman speaking so highly of Yozo had experienced plenty of pain, partially in part by and at the hands of him. Yet she would still be able to see something that he clearly didn't see in himself. Humanity. Throughout the entirety of the novel, we're constantly told about Yozo's lack of connection to humanity, seeing them as creatures or animals. Living such an emotionally isolated and tumultuous life, Yozo never really felt as if anyone saw or understood him, and often he would shy away from anyone he felt like truly did. In Dazai's original novel, that last line was one of the last in the entire book. But in Ito's adaptation, he goes a step further. I won't get too into the details. If you want to know more, 1, read the book, or B, watch Wendigoon's video, which is in the card above. After some digging, people realized that No Longer Human followed a lot of the events that happened in Dazai's life. Things end in Ito's adaptation in a pretty solemn place, although he makes the interesting choice of letting a version of Dazai meet Yozo. I don't know if I would call this kindness, but it's this idea that no matter the fact that this individual has lived a terrible life, witnessed so many horrors, caused so many for other people, he was allowed the posthumous privilege of having someone see him.
A lot of times people will be like, this mug committed a crime, right? And, I can't see this mug as a person. I'm just going to go after this mug, right? But you approach it with more of like an idea of like compassion. You can't like completely disconnect yourself from the idea that this person is like a human being.
Yeah, you have to see the humanity in a person to even understand what the best course of action is, right?
Sure.
It's not the same thing as like giving them kid gloves or, the sort of pseudo hippie thing of like, let's everybody hold hands and kumbaya and everybody's fine. Because like the constant like reaction question is like, well, what about Hitler? Like this kind of thing. You gotta see Hitler's a human. When you see a video of somebody doing some sort of takedown and like just actively trying to dehumanize somebody else, it makes me personally a little bit uncomfortable because I can recognize that there's some sort of insecurity or some sort of problem there. The person is like doing this anti-human behavior sort of working out. And that's a ironically very human thing to do. It's very normal for us to act that way, but it's something that has to change. And if it's going to change, it has to be something that comes from a process of us being healthier about who we are and about what humanity is and the human experience is, which seems like, kind of hokey. And it seems like I'm kind of doing this like, haters and whatever kind of thing. But in reality, I think a lot of people also want to think that the work of making the world a better place, doing some sort of praxis, whatever, is separate from having some sort of strong moral and personal health and some sort of strong ethical health. There's a lot of this on the internet of lefties that think that they can just like say whatever the hell that they want about a person because they're the bad guy. And like, you don't get to do that. You've gained nothing from doing that. There's nobody has gained anything from you doing that. Again, I go back to Freire. That's humanization, humanization or dehumanization. The oppressor dehumanizes himself and dehumanizes the oppressed. And only in the process of humanizing both of us and recognizing both of us in that, right? But sometimes we are the oppressors, sometimes we are the oppressed. Humanizing ourselves is the path towards then creating a more humane world where people are treated more like humans. And until we get there, And then we're just constantly in that process of like, you're the problem. No, you're the problem. I'm the problem. No, you're the problem. Right. That's, I think, where I am at with what you're talking about. And I think it makes a lot of sense, especially in terms of like the internet, you know. My mom calls it the law of the mirror. That's like a Latino thing. La ley del espejo.
Even someone viewed as light years away from humanity could still be seen as human by someone else. Could still be seen as human by you. Huh. I think I'm starting to get a grasp on this. Okay, well, clearly the anti-human concept stretches itself pretty far. First off, for my Western homies, don't forget that you're always going to be a part of something larger than yourself, even when you're alone. The idea that your value comes from your uniqueness is one that can be fought off with the idea that there's beauty in the mundane. There's beauty in what you can contribute just by existing. You contribute just by existing. Live your life. Do what you want to do. Now, does that mean that we should shun people for being different? No. You'll come across plenty of people in your life that live totally different lifestyles from you. But if that individual is not causing harm, leave them be. They're just like you, living their lives. And just by living your lives, you are contributing to the collective. It's easy to see people being different and finding it as an opportunity to clown them. But once again, they're just doing their thing. In the end, it's easy to separate someone from their concept of humanity because it separates you from the idea of being capable of doing the things that they do. It's similar to the concept talked about just a second ago, in that there's a sense of elitism that you feel when you're A, different from everyone else, or B, separate yourself from the idea that you're capable of doing the wrongs that you see other people doing. But play the clip.
The degrees between you and someone who did something bad are not as far apart as you think they are.
Everyone who has ever done something wrong is also human. Everyone. And I know you're probably thinking of some pretty nasty individuals, and also thinking of the fact that the probability of you ending up like these nasty individuals is like so far away, which it probably is. But the idea that that individual isn't also human does humanity as a whole a great disservice.
Like, if you don't recognize their humanity, you don't understand where they come from. Like, and then if you don't understand where they come from, then they just keep coming.
Yeah, and it also, I feel like it also, like, from like an argumentative standpoint, it also weakens your argument.
Yeah.
Because if you stop your understanding of like why somebody does something at you being like, oh, this person is less than human.
Yeah.
Right. It prevents you from being able to understand why it got like that in the first place.
Yeah.
To be able to stop it.
Historically, that's what happened. Like, that's what's happened in this country, is we were taught and raised on the idea of Nazis being like these creatures, like being monsters, like subhuman, like Hitler is subhuman. The Nazis were subhuman, and that's why they did all these horrible things. Nobody was going to stand up there and like stand up for the Nazis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point of what's problematic about that is that now you are seeing Nazism rise again and fascism rise again with slightly different, not even very different, but slightly different coats of paint on them.
Mm-hmm.
And people are unwilling to recognize them as Nazis and as fascists, because that's my cousin, because that's the guy over there and he's a human and he can't be a Nazi because Nazis are monsters. You've literally just allowed for the next Nazis to come through because you weren't able to recognize the humanity of the previous monsters. If you're not in the process of doing that, then what are you doing here, right? Like, what are we actually doing if we're just constantly like, no, people are subhuman and they're monsters? Aside from the unreliability oftentimes of the accusations that we make about people and the assumptions we make about people, that just also just doesn't give us anything. It never works. It never helps. And again, that's not the same thing as saying like, hold their hand, kiss them, you know, join them, bring them into our team immediately. Like, no, it's not about that. It can be, you know, self-defense. It can be violent, for lack of a better term, but it cannot be dehumanizing. It has to be for humans towards humans. And these are not easy, you know, things to parse through, and they're not supposed to be. But you can't just give up and just be like, nah, but they're monsters though, because it's so easy to win when people just see you as less than human. All you have to do is round up with the other people who are seen as less than human, and you build this very strong pact of solidarity. I feel like if you look at that and you say, well, that's just, that's bad practice, or that's counter-revolutionary, or that's pro-fascist, that's enabling, then I think that you're assuming specific ideas out of that idea that I'm not advocating for. That's not part of it. Humanizing is studying. Humanizing is recognizing the tenets of the human experience that a person goes through.
Humanizing is important for progress, for us to not get caught up in the same cycles that humanity has been caught in the past. If we understand the different practices and ideas that cause someone to become who they are, we can prevent those things from happening again in the future. And of course, none of this means that any of these actions are acceptable. Of course they're not. On the contrary, it's good to condemn wrongdoing in a productive way, but to write someone else off as less than human is counterproductive to prevention. So, how do we fight off being anti-human? You remember that we're all human. But hey, that's just the thing I thought of.